Hello, everyone. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Peter Murphy and I am the member for Dunkley. And I would like to start today by acknowledging that I'm on the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. In my electorate of Dunkley, our elders meet at Nair Marjambana, and I would like to recommit to a voice to Parliament and constitutional recognition for our First Nations people, and say that I will be working with our local elders to accomplish that, and acknowledge the elders past and present from the lands where all of you are participating in this webinar from. Really thrilled to be hosting the Leader of the Opposition, Anthony Albanese, for his first speech of 2021 with my caucus colleagues, Mark Dreyfus, a man who needs no introduction, Shadow Attorney General and member for Isaacs, Julian Hill, the member for Bruce, and Anthony Byrne, the member for Holt. We are also joined watching this webinar by a number of our federal ALP caucus members, and of course the important people, all of you, branch members, supporters and constituents from across Southeast Melbourne. So I'd like to officially welcome you to 2021. I think we're all very glad to have turned the calendar over from the year of 2020, a year that of course started with those devastating bushfires and ended with the world fighting a global pandemic, which has tragically already taken the lives of some 1.9 million people. And as we've seen in Sydney and in Melbourne in the last few days, just won't go away. There is no doubt that 2020 was a year of disappointment and difficulty and challenge for so many Australians. Here in Dunkley, unemployment more than doubled. The latest figures say that there were 22,000 locals receiving JobKeeper, employed by about 6,000 local businesses. And we know that many, many more people, predominantly women, casuals, employees at Park, university employees, missed out on JobKeeper. And we also know that the allowances for JobKeeper and JobSeeker have been cut already this year, and people are facing real difficulties. We know that over the last 12 months, mental health, emergency relief, domestic violence, community legal services, they were stretched almost beyond capacity. But what we also saw in 2020 was a year where we were reminded of what we value, of the importance of connection and community, and of the crucial role that good government can and should play in providing support when Australians need it, and charting a path where the future is not only more prosperous, but is also fairer, healthier, and more sustainable than the past. Everyone who knows me and has been to one of our events in Dunkley knows that our electorate is named after a woman called Louisa Dunkley, who was someone who understood deeply the value of work and understood that a job deserves to be remunerated, whether it's looking after family, children, parents at home, or whether it's going to a place of employment. It needs to be fairly remunerated, have good conditions, and is important for not just the people who are in the job, but for the sustainability and the welfare of the community and the nation. We are very lucky in the Federal Labor Party that not only do we have a caucus full of people who believe in and are passionately working for good health, good education and good secure jobs, but we have a leader in Anthony Albanese who has not only fought for it, but has lived it, and has set out clearly for us an agenda to show people that the future for Australia can be one that is better than the past, and that we can take some of the devastation of the last 12 months and build from it a future that benefits not just those who have already benefited, but those people who have really struggled. So without further ado, because you're all watching to hear Anthony Albanese, not Peter Murphy, I would like to introduce Anthony. You know his story. You know that he's a man who understands public housing because that's where he comes from, who understands the importance of the health system because he saw how important it was for his mother who struggled with health, and who has dedicated his life to fighting for the things that matter. So it's a real thrill that he's chosen to talk to all of us for his first speech of what is going to be an incredibly crucial year, not just for our community and our country, but for the world. And it's important that we have leaders in Australia who really stand up and make sure that our future is bright, and that person is Anthony Albanese.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for the generous introduction. I thank you and Mark and Julian and Anthony for hosting this webinar. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we all meet around the country, and pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I want to acknowledge other caucus members who are joining us this morning, but most importantly, I wanted my first message for 2021 to be to the rank and file members of the Australian Labor Party, and particularly those in Victoria who've done it tough during 2020, which has been a difficult year. So to the true believers, I thank you for joining us, and thank you for your ongoing commitment to our party and our movement. In the Christmas message I released a week ago, I noted that we should throw 2020 in the bin. Between the summer bushfire disaster and the coronavirus pandemic, 2020 was, as we all know, the year from hell, a year of pain, of loss, of frustration and heartache. But it was also a year in which everyday Australians shone as we helped each other through the toughest of times. Think about the brave firefighters battling flames to protect their fellow Australians and their property, or the frontline health workers in gowns and masks fighting the invisible enemy of coronavirus in hospitals and aged care facilities. The truck drivers and retail workers putting in extra hours to keep supermarkets stocked as millions of their fellow Australians endured the lockdowns. The cleaners doing double shifts to keep us safe. Neighbours checking in on elderly neighbours. Australians don't just talk about egalitarianism and the fair go. We live these values. They sit at the very core of our national identity. We look after each other. And the Australian Labor Party understands these values. They sit at the core of our movement. Collectivism, helping each other, looking after the vulnerable. No one held back and no one left behind. The big lesson from 2020 is that now more than ever, Australians embrace these values. Labor values. And just as those values got us through the year from hell, they are the values to help us rebuild our nation and our economy in 2021 and beyond. Now, in contrast, Scott Morrison holds very different values. For the past year, the necessity of a crisis has forced him to accept that there is a role for government intervention in the economy in the national interest. However, this concept is not part of the Liberals' core beliefs. Scott Morrison exposed a lot about his character when he rang into 2GB from Hawaii to declare, "I don't hold a hose." Of course, when he did return, on today, 1 year ago, he visited Cobargo in an infamous visit. He interacted with people like young Zoe Salucci, a young mum who was pregnant with her second child, who asked him for help. His response was to force her, or try to force her, to shake his hand. And that infamous visit said a lot about Scott Morrison and his lack of empathy with Australians who are doing it tough. By March, at the same time as announcing restrictions on public gatherings, he was declaring he was going to the footy, to quote him, because I'd previously planned to, and these measures we are putting in from next week. It was quite extraordinary that he was saying it was free for all on the Saturday and Sunday, but on Monday, measures were going to be put in place. Put that in contrast with the leadership shown by Daniel Andrews, your Premier, who made tough decisions, was criticised for them, but we know they were the right decisions. By August, Scott Morrison was campaigning against Labor premiers, saying, and I quote again, "We've got to live with the virus. The idea that you just shut everything down and put all the borders up, that is no way to live with us." Of course, as you know in Victoria all too well, he was sending his Victorian-based ministers out to attack Daniel Andrews' government, culminating in Josh Frydenberg's angry rant in the federal parliament. The Liberals' essential belief is that government should just get out of the way of markets. But we know that markets have no conscience. And today I want to argue that just as conservative political values were useless during the pandemic, they also offer us little in the rebuilding phase. We should use the recovery to address some of the deficiencies in our society so our nation is built back stronger, fairer, and more resilient. We must enhance security at work and lift investment in skills training. But that isn't the plan of our political opponents. They're already reverting to type and giving Australians reminders of what they really stand for. Scott Morrison has proposed legislation that uses the pandemic as cover to allow employers to cut people's wages. That means that a person who worked yesterday on the New Year's Day public holiday could earn $220 less next year than they earned this year. Scott Morrison also plans to abruptly end wage subsidies at the end of March. He wants the unemployed to live on $40 a day. He's creating hiring subsidies, but nearly 1 million people aged over 35 are ineligible, just like the 1 million casuals and entire industries like the arts and universities have been denied wage subsidies for the past year. There's a reason that I chose to deliver today's speech to the true believers of the Australian Labor Party. It's because in 2021, we face a crucial battle. Our task is to get rid of Scott Morrison by standing up for Australian values as the permanent basis for governing this great nation. A nation where people aspire to personal success, but also have aspirations for their family, their community, and their nation. A nation where the common good is recognised as important for the health of society. The battle ahead will be one of values, whether people are held back or left behind. Whether under Labor we build an economy that works for people, or under the Liberals the other way around. I stated a clear strategy at the National Press Club on the 8th of November 2019, the day after we received the Emerson-Weatherall election review, which concluded that we failed to present a clear and concise narrative which explained an optimistic sense of what our country could become. I outlined a 4-stage strategy: review, vision, platform, and policy. We've completed the first 2, and you will have all received the vision statements compiled into a book this week. Our more consolidated draft platform will be considered at the online Special National Conference on 30-31 of March. Our policy rollout stepped up as promised with my first budget reply in October, and we used 2020 to prepare a suite of policies that are ready for finalisation and announcement. In addition, we have adopted reforms of both the New South Wales and Victorian branches, following the most substantial national executive interventions since 1971. We have established a National Campaign Committee, which will meet this month. The review identified the need for focusing on our future positive agenda, but also that voters were distracted from that by issues including franking credits. I can confirm that Labor has heard that message clearly and that we will not be taking any changes to franking credits to the next election. I want the focus to be on Labor's positive agenda for Australia's future, with a better recovery from the first recession in 30 years presided over by the Morrison government. The Morrison government's record gives us plenty to work with. Before anyone had even heard of coronavirus, national debt had doubled. Productivity was going backwards. Manufacturing was dying with 68,000 jobs lost. 140,000 fewer Australians were in training than when this government took office. 1 in 3 Australians was working as a casual with no access to sick leave or holiday pay and no security of work. And there was political chaos. 3 prime ministers and 3 deputy prime ministers in 6 years. Hawke and Keating reformed the economy and gave us 30 years of uninterrupted economic growth. Rudd and Gillard gave us the apology, the NDIS, and saved Australia from the global financial crisis with strategic investment, which left a positive legacy in public transport, roads, and the national broadband network. In 8 years, this mob have given us $1 trillion in debt with nothing to show for it. Higher power prices, inaction on climate change, sports rorts, 40,000 Australians stranded overseas, an NBN model that was out of date before it was built. They're led by a man who stands for nothing except advertising campaigns, selfies, and favours for Liberal mates. Scott Morrison is a showman who loves grand announcement, but never delivers. Remember the $4 billion emergency relief fund he established, saying it would yield $200 million a year to address natural disaster and improve resilience. Nothing happened until a few weeks ago, 18 months after the fund was established. Or the amount allocated to improve water infrastructure. Not a dollar was spent, but the marketing man issued no fewer than 50 media releases about it. He is always there for the photo op, but never there for the follow-up. The Prime Minister made much of his stewardship of the so-called National Cabinet during the pandemic. Whenever state premiers had success in the fight against the pandemic, Mr. Morrison claimed it as a product of his own. But if anything went wrong, he just blamed the states. Border wars, selectively attacking premiers. Australians wanted cooperation, but got political posturing. The Prime Minister even refused to take responsibility for the aged care system, even as coronavirus was sweeping through nursing homes. 685 aged care residents died. That is a tragedy. Yet he still refuses to accept responsibility. He accepts he always had a plan in spite of the Royal Commissioners clearly stating that none existed. For Scott Morrison, everything is about politics. In the months leading up to last year's bushfire season, he ignored expert warnings and calls for more aerial firefighting resources. And as the nation burned and our cities were choked by smoke, Mr. Morrison's only focus was photo opportunities where, understandably, many people saw straight through him and refused to shake his hand. Then there is the waste and mismanagement for which no one ever is held responsible. Scott Morrison paid $30 million to a Liberal Party donor for a piece of land near the new Sydney airport that was worth just $3 million. And no one has been held to account for this waste. Yet when the head of Australia Post wasted $20,000 on Cartier watches for executives, he savaged her in Parliament and spent more than that on a report into the scandal, which he now refuses to make public. The Prime Minister is only interested in accountability if it involves a chance to get on the 6 o'clock news. That's why no one has paid any real price for the shameful sports rorts episode, where he spent hundreds of millions of dollars in marginal and target seats before the last election instead of distributing sporting grants on the basis of need. Scott Morrison uses taxpayers as though it is the money of the Liberal Party. And he doesn't even understand why that is wrong. It is little wonder that the National Integrity Commission, promised in 2018, has become yet another announcement without delivery. As I said, the coming election is about values, and I'm very proud about the Labor team's performance over the past year. Throughout the pandemic, it was my judgment that Australians had no interest in partisan politics. They wanted and indeed needed outcomes. We were constructive. We put the national interest first. We supported the government's economic stimulus packages, even where they included elements that we opposed. And we continued to promote ideas. Mr. Morrison makes much of the success of wage subsidies. They have kept 700,000 people in work. It was Labor that suggested them. At the time, the Prime Minister denounced the idea as very dangerous. Then he adopted it. We proposed support for renters and an eviction moratorium, paid pandemic leave, Medicare rebates for telehealth, mental health care. All of them initially ignored or rejected, all of them eventually embraced. But now, as we move into recovery mode, he's heading back to political conservatism and away from the values held by mainstream Australia. Our nation's best hope for strong economic recovery that builds a better Australia is a Labor government that understands the values and aspirations of the Australian people. To win the next election, we need to do more than highlight the current government's deficiencies. And when it comes to Scott Morrison, I think Australians have started to work him out anyway. They see him as fake, as someone who is always political and always looking to shift blame to others. A man who agrees to a common sense change of just one word in the national anthem, but hopes no one notices there has been no progress on recognising First Nations people with a voice to Parliament enshrined in our Constitution. Labor's path to victory is a set of policies that can deliver an economic recovery while adhering to the egalitarian impulse that so characterised 2020. It's about boosting productivity, investing in people, reviving manufacturing and utilising the power of government purchasing to build new industries. Above all, it is about jobs. That's why we have adopted a future made in Australia, one of our central themes of our plan for recovery. Australia must maximise our potential for high-value manufacturing here to support jobs and create resilience. Southeast Melbourne already produces everything from rail, buses, caravans and solar panels, but has the potential for so much more. Local jobs in our suburbs and regions will also take pressure off our capital city CBDs. A Labor government will use the power of government purchasing to revive our manufacturing sector. The Andrews government has demonstrated the benefit of rail manufacturing here. We have train manufacturers in Queensland, New South Wales, Western Australia, as well as there in Victoria. If we build the new trains required for the new public transport networks in this country, we'll create thousands of jobs and enrich our people's skills in heavy manufacturing. While Labor has already developed our rail manufacturing plan, Mr. Morrison and Conservative state premiers are happy to source trains overseas. When they arrive here, they consistently are not fit for purpose and require refitting to meet our needs at a substantial cost. In the same way, we need to help our manufacturers get a greater piece of defence procurement contracts. We could also be investing in social housing right now, creating immediate jobs and improving lives. But Mr. Morrison's rigid faith in hard right economic theory prohibits such approaches. But such approaches are desperately needed if we are to rebuild from the coronavirus pandemic. Since taking office, the coalition has presided over a collapse in productivity. The ability to do more with less will be critical to our economic recovery in the next decade. But again, Mr. Morrison has no plan. I suppose he imagines the market will sort everything out. Labor has a plan to considerably boost productivity by increasing workforce participation. Under current tax and childcare arrangements, Many parents are discouraged from taking full-time work. Our plan for cheaper childcare will benefit 97% of working families, while benefiting the economy by around $2 for every dollar that's invested. We will move towards universal provision of affordable childcare, with a first step of removing the cap, lifting the subsidy to 90% and improving the taper rate. It makes no sense that parents struggle so much more before their children reach primary school age, and that for some working mothers, it actually costs them money to work a fourth or a fifth day in the week. And we know that 90% of human brain development occurs in the first 5 years of life, making quality early learning absolutely critical to a child's future prospects. Good for children, good for families, good for the economy. That's Labor's childcare plan. Climate change is real. We all know that. We received a dramatic demonstration of the catastrophic consequences for lives, for our economy, and for our environment just last year. We must deal with this challenge. Just as we're getting through the pandemic by listening to the science, we need to show the same respect to science when it comes to climate change. If we are smart, we will use the challenge as an opportunity to create new jobs and new industries. With appropriate support for research and development and the right policies, we can become a renewable energy superpower. We can create jobs here in new technologies, but also reduce power prices, which will create hundreds of thousands of jobs right across the economy, but especially in manufacturing. That's Labor's plan. Scott Morrison has no plan. In the past few months, Australia has become increasingly isolated in the global community on climate. All of the major industrial nations in our region and beyond are acting. Europe, the United Kingdom, Japan, Korea, and very soon the United States under President-elect Joe Biden have accepted the need for net zero emissions by 2050, a target that I announced in Melbourne last January. China has also adopted this target, but by 2060. In contrast, the government is frozen in time while the world warms around it. In conclusion, can I say that in receiving the election review, that Labor would be back as the party of growth, the party of aspiration, the party of social justice, the party of nation building, the party of our natural environment, the party of science, and the party of the future. The experience of the pandemic has confirmed the importance of government, but more importantly, that Australians do want to look after our common interest. Contrast that with Josh Frydenberg's declaration that Margaret Thatcher is a role model for future action, the leader who said there is no such thing as society. In the Work Choices Mark II legislation introduced by the Morrison government last month, we can see the direction the Conservatives would like to go. Our task is to ensure that whether the election is late 2021 or early 2022, Labor is able to form government and take Australia in a positive direction, which is as caring, as courageous, as optimistic, and as determined as the Australian people have shown themselves to be in 2020. And as I said, back in 2019, when it comes to the formal election campaign, we'll be kicking with the wind in the fourth quarter. I thank you for being a part of this journey.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And can I wish a very happy new year to everybody who's on this call after what has been an appallingly difficult 2020. I'd thank Anthony very, very much for addressing Victorian branch members first as his first public engagement in 2021 in recognition of what a difficult year it's been for everybody living in Victoria. But I'd say to all that we finish 2020 and we start 2021 in a strong position. It's in no small part thanks to the strong, strategic and thoughtful leadership from Anthony Albanese. I remind everyone that our primary vote is higher now, Labor's primary vote is higher now than it was at the 2019 election. And I'd invite everybody on this call to reflect on that position as compared to the position that every single opposition in Australia now finds itself in after the very difficult year that it has been. Compare the position of federal Labor and our federal leader to the woeful performance, the pathetic performance of the Victorian Liberals led by some bloke whose name I can't really remember. It is thanks to that thoughtful leadership that Anthony Albanese has shown through this year, the constructive approach that he has led federal Labor with, that we finish the year in that position of strength and look forward to what could very easily be an election year. You've all just heard in the speech that Anthony's delivered the clarity of Labor values and the strength of what our party offers Australia. I say again, we're in a strong position in what could be an election year right at the start, and Anthony has now hit the ground straight away, running at the start of 2021. As you've just heard, we will take to this election clear policies on childcare, clear policies on high-value manufacturing, something of particular importance to us in Southeast Melbourne because of the importance that manufacturing is for the people of Southeast Melbourne and the employment that it provides to people in our electorates. We will take to the election, as you've just heard from Anthony, clear policies on modernising the electricity grid, adopting policies to make Australia a renewable energy superpower so that Australia can play our part in the global effort to tackle climate change. And importantly, something very close to my heart, we will be taking to this election clear policies to establish a powerful, independent and properly resourced National Integrity Commission. Something that, as I said in a media release yesterday, we've just marked 750 days since Morrison and his Attorney General, Christian Porter, promised to establish a National Integrity Commission, an anti-corruption commission. One is certainly sorely needed, given the record of this government. And we've seen up until now, 750 days later, nothing, and nothing in sight either. It's not apparent that this government is actually ever going to establish a National Integrity Commission. They don't want the Sydney Airport land scandal that Anthony has just mentioned investigated. They don't want sports rorts investigated. And I'm only saying thank you here to Anthony, so I won't continue with what could be a very long list of scandals and corruption that this government has engaged in its 8 years in office. Anthony will lead us to the election with the same strong, steady and constructive leadership that Anthony has shown up until now, that Anthony has in particular shown through the most difficult of years that we have just had. As you've heard from Anthony, we in Labor understand how important government is. We think that this pandemic year that we've just endured, and we are still enduring, has reminded Australians, if they needed any reminding, of the immense importance of government in our lives. I am looking forward to this year. I hope all of you are looking forward to what will be a better year. And I'm in particular looking forward to working with Anthony, with all of my colleagues and with all of our party members to make sure that Labor wins the upcoming election. Thanks very much, Anthony.